there. Feels like it's been a while since I've done a video, but I didn't need to do one until now. So I'm sure you get the idea. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 7 in our Kessler textbook. Chapter 7 is entitled Experiencing the Sacred, and rather obviously, it's going to talk about sacred or religious experiences. Now, although these religious experiences can have some different forms depending on which religious tradition we're talking about, it's amazing how many religious experiences share certain characteristics, which we will get to as we go on. Your book begins by talking about some of the religious experiences of the Prophet Muhammad and the religion of Islam, and Buddha, or the Buddha, I should say, Buddha's enlightenment experience most especially within Buddhism. Now, I am not going to go over those within this video because they are in your book and you can read about them just as easily as I can tell you about them. So, to begin with, what I think we first need to think about is, what is a religious experience? Well, this is fairly simple. And in fact, in your book, and I actually wrote it down, and now I can't find where I wrote it, of course. But in your book, the author, Gary Kessler, tells us that a religious experience is any experience from visions and dreams and voices to simple feelings of love and devotion. It's any experience that the person having the experience believes to be religiously significant. Pretty simple, right? I'm sure if most of us sat down and thought about it for a moment, we would understand that we've all, I say all, that's probably an overstatement, but many of us have had religious experiences. If you're in a religious tradition that prays or communes with the sacred in some way, very often that helps to bring about a religious experience. If you've ever undergone a religious type ritual, maybe baptism or any other type of ritual, right? Communion is a good Christian example of that. But there are many types of religious rituals, and many people report having some sort of religious experience during their own tradition's religious rituals. It's not an uncommon thing. Also, when we look at many different religions, we find them in the sacred text. I've told you about Muhammad's and the Buddhas. In Christianity, you might think about Saul, who was on the road and he sees a bright light, and it's believed by Christians that he was kind of knocked out, I guess is the word. In fact, he collapses and he's blind for 3 days, during which God speaks to him. But every religion you come across has some sort of experience that can be labeled as religious. So I want to begin by talking about some different types of religious experience. Now, there's 3 basic types we're going to get to. There are revelation, ecstatic, and mystical experience. And within these particular types of experiences, of course, there are other experiences that fit into these rather broad categories. So let's talk about revelation to begin with, because this one's pretty simple and it's one of the most easily recognized. A revelatory revelation experience, excuse me, I'm mixing my words up today, but a revelation or a revelatory experience involves a human becoming an agent or a spokesperson for the sacred or the divine. In other words, the human becomes a prophet, someone who is there in order to, well, say whatever the sacred wants that human to say. Fairly simple. There are two basic types of revelatory experiences, as well as two basic types of prophets. Now, are there others? I'm sure we could find some, but these are the two we're going to worry about. So, within the revelatory religious experience, it can be an individual experience or it can be a communal experience. This is pretty simple. Obviously, the individual experience is the experience that relates only to the person having the experience at that particular time. I think you get that. It's only the person receiving the revelation from the sacred power. The communal experience, however, will relate to a wider group of people. In other words, if the sacred power speaks to more than one person at the time, it can happen. And in fact, there are quite a few religious experiences reported throughout history that have happened, that where they are communal experiences. For a very easy example, I would bring up the experience wherein Yahweh, the God of the ancient Hebrews, appeared before them when they were escaping slavery in Egypt. He appeared before them as a pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night. And you're saying, well, how is that a revelation type experience? How do they become agents or spokespersons of the divine? Well, the entire community was able to see the power and might of Yahweh, and in that case, they are able to report on that. They can say, yes, I saw it. Yes, he is real. Yes, he is powerful. And please note that I'm using the pronoun he simply because it's what's been used historically. It's just easier some days. I don't mean to imply that that Yahweh is he, and I don't mean to imply that Yahweh is she. The fact is, in the Jewish mindset, and one that I tend to agree with, but it doesn't really matter if I do or not, Yahweh has no body. Yahweh is completely and totally spirit. Therefore, Yahweh is not he nor she. Yahweh is above all that embodiment type stuff that we would need for gender. But in English, it's easier to use a pronoun than not to. So at any rate, when we have, whether it's individual or communal, revelatory experience, you've got the sacred telling the person having the experience or the persons that something's going on they need to know about. They are receiving some new information, as it were. And as a general rule, the sacred power expects the person receiving that particular experience to become a conduit or a mouthpiece for the sacred. In other words, a prophet. Well, that's pretty neat when you think about it. You see, prophets, outside of our popular use of the term as being people who can foretell the future, a prophet in its religious terminology, is simply a person who tells what the sacred power wants them to tell, whether it's the future or just a truth or whatever the sacred power says to say. That's what the prophet is to say. Now, there are also two basic types of prophets. There are emissary prophets and exemplary prophet. An emissary prophet is one who acts almost like a mouthpiece. God told me to tell you, thou shalt not dot, dot, dot. Very simple. That's an example of an emissary prophet. They are emissaries from the sacred power to the human world. On the other hand, an exemplary prophet is a little bit different. An exemplary prophet does not exist to tell the people what God said or what the sacred power, whatever you may call the sacred power, said. The exemplary prophet is there to teach others how to have their own religious experience with the sacred power. So the exemplary prophet, for instance, might say, I have prayed for 40 days and 40 nights, and then for the next 20 days, I only drank water and ate half a loaf of bread every day. And through this ritual, the performance of these actions, the veil between the spirit world and the human world was thinned. And therefore, I was able to have a revelatory experience from God. You can do it too if you do the same things I did. Now, is that a real thing? No, I kind of made up that actual experience. But the idea is that the exemplary prophet is going to serve as an example to other people, saying that if you follow this example, you can have your own religious experience. That's kind of neat when you think about it. And it's fairly simple to understand. You will find revelational experiences and prophets of both type in many, many, many different religious traditions. So this isn't one that is shared only in monotheistic religions. You can see it throughout many religious traditions. Sorry to use the word many 14 times there. Now, the second type of religious experience that I want to talk about is called the ecstatic experience. And I'll spell that just so you know, Ecstatic. An ecstatic religious experience involves intimate contact with gods or goddesses or any form of the sacred. The primary psychological feature within these ecstatic type experience is losing control of oneself. In fact, the word ecstatic tends to mean to stand outside of oneself. It's like looking at yourself. Well, that's interesting. Can you think of any type of ecstatic experiences? Some people believe that those who are in the Pentecostal church, it's called being slain in the spirit, are having an ecstatic type of religious experience. And there's two basic types of ecstatic experience. One is that of possession, and the other is an out-of-body experience. I believe these are on page 142. Well, what does that mean, though? Well, let's start with possession, because I bet most of us have seen a scary movie sometime in our life. And in the scary movies, possession always refers to some sort of demon or evil spirit or devil taking over our body and squishing our own personality to the side. It's a hostile takeover, if you will, and it usually isn't done for good. However, there's also the idea that sacred power can take over your body. And it may not be a hostile takeover. Very often, the person's own spirit is considered to have moved over for the spirit of, let's just say the spirit of God is kind of a shorthand here. And it's done with the approval of the person's spirit. When we were talking about being slain in the spirit in the Pentecostal and holiness churches, this is probably a form of possession by a good spirit, in this case by God or by Jesus. The idea is not that it's an awful thing, but it's allowing the Holy Spirit to take over not only your body, but your heart, your mind, and your soul. And you're okay with it. That's possession. It's very, very simple when we think about it. And once again, this is not found only in monotheistic religions. The idea of possession in one form or another runs through many different religious traditions here on earth. Out of body experiences are a little bit different than possession. In your book, it talks about several of Muhammad's early experiences. And in one of these, this one is usually referred to as Muhammad's night journey. Muhammad is visited by the angel Jibril, or Gabriel, as we'd say in English. And Muhammad's insides are washed out in a basin by the angel, and then a small horse with the head of a woman and wings comes and takes Muhammad on a journey up through all of the 7 levels of heaven. And he talks to different religious figures up through these 7 levels to where eventually he gets to the very top level and talks to Allah or God. Now, what is this? Well, it's a form of an out-of-body experience. Some people will say, well, that just couldn't have happened because he was there, and if somebody had opened up his innards and washed his insides and purified him from the inside out, that's impossible. And it must have been a dream. Well, supposedly it did happen within a dream. However, remember that especially in ancient times, and even now to a certain extent, there is this idea that dreams are real things. Dreams are the time for humans when that barrier, that veil between the human world and the spiritual world is at its thinnest, where revelations and different religious experience can come across the veil, can cross through that divide, if you will. And it doesn't mean that your body needs to actually have this happening. He doesn't need to have physically gotten on the back of this horse and flown up through all the different levels of heaven. His spirit can do so. And that's just as real as his physical body doing so. But the out-of-body experience is, let's see if I've written this down. Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. The out-of-body experience is very similar to the reports we get of people who die on the operating table and they come back and they report that they floated up to the top of the ceiling in that operating room and look down and see themselves, and they see the doctors, and they'll report whatever the doctor said to each other. The fact is, an out-of-body experience is just that, the idea of your spirit leaving your body, but still having some sort of continuing life and experience throughout. So it's an interesting idea, the ecstatic idea, with its different types such as possession and out-of-body experience. Now, honestly, not all religions are these grandiose type of events. They're not all visions and dreams and seeing God and things like that. For many people, and probably all of us at one time or another, if we do have some religious background, religious experiences tend to be much more subdued than the big ones, if you will. Very often they are simply very distinct feelings that we have for distinct reasons. And some of the triggers for these feelings might be seeing great beauty or hearing great truths or meditating and becoming aware of a great sense of sacred power. Now let's talk about 4 of these feelings that are very prevalent in certain religious experiences. One of these is the feeling of absolute dependence. That's called finitude, by the way. And absolute dependence is this idea that you become aware of how dependent you are upon something larger than you. For instance, God. Okay? The idea is that you understand that in reality, you are no bigger than a grain of sand on the beach, and that your very existence in this world is proof that there must be some sort of sacred power that supports you and even your creation, that without that sacred power, you would not exist. Friedrich Schleiermacher, I know that's a great name, isn't it? He was German, by the way. He lived from 1768 to 1834. He thought that that feeling of finitude was irreducible to all religious experience. In other words, he thought that finitude was the universal core of all religious, not just all religious feelings, but all religious experience. During this time, he had a dispute with the educated elite of the time, with their idea of religion as tradition and ritual based. To him, religion was based on experience. So, in other words, the way you learned about your religion was not through the ritual, it was not through the education, it was by an experience. And for him, the finitude experience, that feeling you would receive of absolute dependence upon a sacred power, was at the absolute core. Well, that's good. Keep it in mind, because we're going to come back to him in a minute. And then there are three other basic types of feelings we see as religious experience. One is that feeling of awe or wonder. We call it the numinous, Numinous, the numinous feeling. This is the feeling that makes you see something out of this world, to use that phrase, and you go, wow, and you are struck by it. It takes you out of yourself, and you realize the greatness and majesty of the thing. In this case, we're assuming the thing is a form of sacred power. And then there's simple feelings of unity. Unity with what? Well, with sacred power. We call this a mystical feeling. We'll talk about mystical experiences in a moment, but right now, just the feeling, to realize that you might be one with the sacred power in some manner, would be considered a mystical feeling. And then there's feelings of confirmation, not conformation as if you're exactly like the sacred power, but confirmation, that you're the way you think and feel about the sacred in that moment is the right way. You're on the right path, so to speak. But I want to get back to that numinous idea. Numinous is an odd word when you think about it. Well, just as Schleiermacher thought that finitude was actually the core of all religious experience, there was another man, in fact, another German guy. His name was Rudolf Otto, O-T-T-O. Same forward as it is backward. Rudolf Otto, Rudolf, by the way, lived from 1896 to 1937. He thought that Schleiermacher's idea of the finitude, you could only infer that the divine existed using Schleiermacher's idea of finitude. He also thought that Schleiermacher's idea of finitude was just too subjective, that it also had a theistic bias, because in order to infer that that your absolute dependence existed on the sacred power. It's almost as if saying that all religions must have a God, in fact, must be monotheistic. And he didn't think that was fair. He thought that the numinous idea had more to do with the core of all religious experience because it was an experience of the holy or the sacred power. It was an actual experience of sacred power, but it didn't matter if it was monotheistic or theistic at all. Even some of the non-theistic religions, people who believed in those could have the numinous experience. So he coined a phrase or a concept of the numinous, if you will, and this is what he called it: the mysterium tremendum et fascinans. Very obviously, that's Latin. What it means is the fearful and fascinating mystery. Well, that's really interesting. Let's break it down a little bit more. Mysterium. Mysterium, in this case, refers to the holy, WHOLLY, other, something that is completely different than anything a human could even be aware of. Something that's experienced with what's called blank wonder and stupor. It's kind of like, what is it? And nobody can explain it because there's none other like it. So that's the mysterium. Then we get to the tremendum, which can mean awfulness, terror, demonic dread, awe, absolute unapproachability, overpoweringness, majesty, might, sense of dread, a sense of one's own nothingness. Wow, that's a big. The wrath of God can even get into that tremendum thing. Tremendum is a big word. And it's one that, as a general rule, we are frightened to death of because it's so large we can't explain it. But then we get et fascinans. Now, the et simply means and here, but the fascinans part, it's a potent charm. It's attractiveness in spite of fear or terror. You can't stay away from it. It scares the life out of you, but you still got to chase it. So when we put all this together, the mysterium tremendum et fascinans, we get the fearful and fascinating mystery. In other words, sacred power as examined or experienced in that feeling of awe or wonder, that numinous feeling, is that fearful and fascinating mystery that brings us to it, even though we're scared to death to get closer. We can't help ourselves. It attracts us like a magnet's attracted to iron. It's a big, big thing. So feelings are just as much religious experiences as being taken up to a level of heaven or having God knock us down on the road and make us go blind for a few days. It's amazing to think, isn't it, that religious experiences are open to just about everybody. And that brings us to our last type of religious experiences, that of the mystical experience. Now, there are, of course, different forms of mystical experiences, but let's talk about what it is to begin with. Well, first, one of the oldest types of mystical experience you have is something called shamanic ecstasy, Shamanic. It comes from the root word shaman, right? It's a little bit of a different one than we've talked about before. This is a form of religious experience in which a shaman or a religious functionary of some type is engaged within an ecstatic experience for him or herself. Well, excuse me, not for him or herself, but for the good of their community. There's a really good case in your book about an Eskimo shaman who goes on a spiritual journey all the way down to the bottom of the sea and talks to the goddess of the sea and convinces the goddess of the sea to release some of her seals so that his people who are going on a seal hunt for food the next day can get enough food to feed their families. Now, the shaman, in this case, he is successful in convincing the goddess of the ocean to release the seals. But it's the community as a whole who benefits from his success. And in fact, that's why he's doing it, not for his own sake, but for the success of the community. But this isn't the only type of mystical experience that there is, nor is it one that most of us are real familiar with. There are different types of mystical experience, and today we're going to talk about a few. First one we're going to talk about was developed by a man named Walter Stace. In 1961, he wrote a book called Mysticism and Philosophy. And in this book, he described two types of mystical experiences. He said that one type was the introvertive and the other was the extrovertive. Those words are spelled exactly as they sound. He said in the introvertive type, all sensate and conceptual content disappears and the mystic experiences a state of pure consciousness. Well, what's sensate and conceptual content? All right, let's go over it. Sensate just refers to the five senses, anything that you can see or hear or smell or touch or taste, that type of thing. And conceptual content is content that tells you where and when you are in the world. For instance, I know I'm sitting in front of my desk because that green wall's behind me. What does that mean? Well, the green wall's behind my desk. So if I'm sitting in front of the green wall, not on my desk, I'm sitting in front of my desk. I know when it's 11 o'clock, I could look at the clock up there on my wall or this one down here on my computer. Or I could just think, what time is it? And pay attention to how I feel, to my sensate stuff, which also envelops my conceptual. And I can know when it's 12 o'clock because I'm hungry when it gets to be 12 o'clock. If I were teaching this class in a classroom and we were all there, I could know that I was the teacher of the class because of where I was in the class. I was at the head of the class. I was the one talking. Everybody, and I'm the one standing when I'm in the classroom, of course, but everybody else sits down. All that content in the introvertive mystical experience, according to Walter Stace, disappears. The individual is completely alone. And they don't even recognize that. I won't say they don't recognize their body, but it's as if it's only their spirit is there. Even the body has disappeared. It's pure spirit existing in pure consciousness. Wow, that's pretty crazy when you think about it. Everything's gone. And the world you're in, try to imagine this, the world you're in does not exist. You can look around, but there's nothing there to see. There's nothing to hear or to feel or to smell or touch or taste. And then you can't even look. But if you could look and you look down at your hands, you'd say, I don't have hands. I don't have eyes to see if I have hands. You don't need those things. It is only your consciousness that exists within this type of experience. Okay, hold on to that. The extrovertive experience. Stace described this as a unifying vision in which the unity of all things is apprehended behind the multiplicity of the world. That's kind of wild too. But what he's saying is that with this one, you still experience everything in the world. You see the trees, you see the curtains in front of your window, you see your hands, which means that, boy, I have small hands, don't I? It also means that you have eyes to see with still. You can see and experience all of these many, many, many different things, but you are able to appreciate and understand that all of these many different things in the world are actually all one. There isn't a multiplicity. There's one. Kinda. I know, it gets a little confusing. Both the introvertive and the extrovertive experience are marked by a sense of having experienced the final truth about things. They're also marked by feelings of sacredness and joy and paradoxicality. And remember, I think we've gone over paradoxicality. That's that state of when two things that shouldn't be able to exist at one time but actually do. That's a paradox. And ineffability. And if you're wondering, ineffability means you can't talk about it. You can't even think about it. You can't put what you see and what you experience into words. It's just, it can't be expressed in that manner. Now, Stace said that the first one, the introverted experience, was superior to the extroverted experience. And this is where it gets a little confusing as well. He said that introverted experience was superior because the subject-object dualism and the sense of space/time are transcended in the introverted, but not in the extroverted. What the heck was he even talking about here? It's a very good question, right? Okay, let's find out. Subject-object dualism. This is used in many different forms when you study religion and when you study philosophy and when you study a whole lot of other things. But in this case, what Stace is referring to is the idea is that anytime there's more than one of anything, you're going to have subject-object dualism because one is the subject and the other is the object. Or one is the one that does the action and the other is the one that has the action done to them. How do I mean? Well, if you look at English grammar, that's kind of an easy way to think about this. Think about this sentence. The boy kicked the ball. Obviously, the boy is our subject here. Kicked is a verb and the ball is the object, right? We could change the verb. We could change that action word. We could say the boy kissed the ball. But the fact is the boy is still the subject and the ball is still the object of the boy's action. Stace is saying that when you have two, you automatically have subject-object dualism, and one is always the actor and one is always the acted upon. And he didn't think that was, what's the word? He thought that was something that needed to be transcended. He didn't think that it was fair for one entity and an experience to always be the thing acted upon and the other to always be the subject or the one who does the acting. Okay, but what about this sense of space and time? Well, space and time, and we've talked a little bit about this before, but space and time are tricky little things. But he's saying that when you, in the introvertive type experience, if you get rid of sensate and conceptual content, there is no space and time, because that's what gives space and time. That's what lets us know what space and time is. Where we are and when we are and how we are depends all on sensate and conceptual content. Without it, there's no difference between our pure spirit and everything else. It's all one. So the introvertive gets rid of the conceptual and sensate concept, doesn't it? It does away with it completely. So to him, the fact that there's only one, how shall we say it, one consciousness, because there's nothing else there within this particular experience. In the introverted experience, there's only that one pure consciousness. That's great, because you're getting rid of the other stuff. And there's one that's one with everything. Okay, sounds a little weird. Not everybody agreed with his typology, obviously. If they did, I wouldn't have anything to talk about, right? So there's another guy. His name was R.C., those are his initials, Zahner, Z-A-E-H-N-E-R. Wrote his own book. He called his book Mysticism, Sacred and Profane. And this is what he said. He said, no. He said, Stace, there's not two types of mystical experiences. There are actually three, and these are the three types. There's nature mysticism, what he called soul, or sometimes he called it monistic mysticism, and the third one was theistic mysticism. Now, two of these are very close, and for our purpose, we'll assume they equate to stasis types. The nature mysticism is the closest to stasis extrovertive type, and soul or monistic mysticism is the closest to stasis introvertive type. But his third one, the theistic type, this is the one he thought was superior to all. And he said that theistic mysticism involves an ecstasy of union, but not identity with the divine. That people who have these experiences believe their experiences are due to the grace of God, and they are overcome by intense feelings of bliss and love. An ecstasy of union, but not identity. Well, that's interesting, because it's about relationship. He's saying in the theistic type of mysticism, in this experience, there are two. One is the sacred, and the other is the individual having the experience. And they are in relationship. They are related, just if you look on a peppermint candy cane and you've got the red and white stripes that go all the way up, right? Those stripes say in the same relationship all the way up the candy cane. They don't ever become pink. They keep their own, what shall we call it, their own individualness, but they stay in relationship. Now, why did he think that the theistic type was better than the other two, than soul or nature mysticism? Because according to Zahner, the theistic mysticism is best because it involves a strong moral sense, whereas nature mysticism is premoral, that is, it comes before morality, and the soul/monistic mysticism is amoral. It's outside the scope of morality. And you're thinking, morality? What's he talking about? You have to look at this very deeply, because when it comes to morality, The first thing you have to have in order to have any kind of morality is to have two. What do I mean? Well, morality, if we kind of boil it down to its most basic denominator, morality is simply how two different things treat each other. Two people, a person and a cat, a person and a chipmunk, two. Even a person and a river, for that matter, have a morality. How do they treat each other? Okay, keep that in mind. Theistic mysticism has the person having the experience and the sacred power. Two, in relationship. Keep that in mind. Soul mysticism, which is the same as the introvertive, it's premoral, right? Excuse me. Did I get that right? Yeah. No, I didn't. I'm sorry. Nature mysticism, where everything within and without are one, like the introvertive type, that is premoral. You don't need morality yet. If everything is one, there's no reason for morality, because remember, morality is when you have two and how those two relate to each other. Soul or monistic mysticism is outside the scope of morality. You just don't need it. It is, what's the word? Amoral. Not immoral, not that at all, but amoral. Okay? It's not concerned with or amenable to moral judgment. It doesn't work. It's like some saying that judging a tricycle by bicycle standards. It doesn't work. It has no need of a morality. So to him, the best one was theistic mysticism that had two in relationship. And this relationship causes them to have a moral or a morality between the two. It means that they are always in relationship, just like those red and white stripes on the candy cane. That's what he thought. It was a little bit odd, right? When it comes to mystical, I'm sorry, I forgot the word all of a sudden. I always do that, though. When it comes to mystical experiences, there's several characteristics that all mystical experiences might have. There's this union with the sacred. There's deep insights about being made one with the sacred. It's about getting way down deep and understanding the nature of the sacred power. This is the type of thing that people feel they have experienced after they come out of these types of experiences. Read this part of your book very carefully. It will help you understand it much more easily than I've probably explained to it. It's not an easy concept to explain or understand, but it's important. So please read it. And if you have any particular question, something you just don't quite get, send me an email. I'll be more than happy to help explain it some more. So let's move on to something a little bit easier, if you will. Something called mystical techniques. What are mystical techniques? Well, they're simply things that people do that will help them have their own mystical experience. Certain things they can do that make them having a mystical experience much more likely. Now, interestingly enough, we usually refer to these as disciplines, but in Hinduism, you hear them referred to as yogas, Y-O-G-A. Yeah, that same word you're thinking of. Yoga, which is actually translated as discipline, is a word that describes a technique that can be used to promote a religious experience. It's very simple, right? Your book says any discipline or path used to promote religious experiences, many of the mystical type. So we're going to borrow the term and let's talk about some different types of yoga in the Hindu experience, and maybe that'll help us understand how these disciplines put you in the manner of having a mystical experience. Now, your book outlines 4 basic types of yogas. Are there more? Sure. But these are the 4 that you see most prevalently. The first one is called Raja Yoga, R-A-J-A, or Royal Yoga. Excuse me. Patanjali lived in the 3rd century. He was a wise person, a sage as he's referred to. And he described Raja Yoga as a cessation of the mental whirlwind. He meant this is how you get your brain to turn off. I think we've all had those mental whirlwind nights where you're lying in bed and you think, oh, I think I'll go to the movies with my friend tomorrow. And then you think, oh, I can't do that tomorrow. I've got to work tomorrow. So you think, okay, well, I'll work tomorrow and then Saturday night I'll go to the movies. Oh, wait, I can't go Saturday night because, well, no, I could go Saturday night, but I've got to go home first because my mom wants some help. My little brother is giving her a hard time and I need to talk to him. So I'll do that, then go out Saturday night with my friend. Oh, wait a minute, I can't go out Saturday night with my friend because I have a religion test on Monday. Okay, and it goes like that. And it turns over and over in your head. And then you start thinking about how you're going to pay the bills. And can you put it off till next month? But you can't because you've got another bill. You know what I mean? The mental whirlwind. We've all been through it. And Patanjali said, if you practice Raja Yoga, you can get to a point of meditation where you can get rid of the mental whirlwind and actually meditate. And you could eventually isolate your individual eternal spirit. You can isolate it from all that matter, from all that stuff, and unite it with the Supreme Spirit. Now, in Hinduism, what's it called when you reunite your spirit with the Supreme Spirit? Anybody remember? It's enlightenment or moksha. Absolutely. Yeah. He said that there were these stages that you would go through, and you'd practice each stage. They were hierarchical stages, meaning that you had to master one stage before you went to the next. But the stages worked. And these I'm just going to name them very quickly. First stage is purification and preparation. That is, you stop doing bad things and you start preparing yourself. The second is you start practicing, it's called the practice of virtues, and cleanliness, studiousness, and serenity. In other words, you replace all those bad things you were doing with good things. Number 3 is you start practicing the correct posture for meditation. This is what we see in American yoga studios when you go in and start doing all the stances and postures, right? That's what Americans usually think of as yoga, but it's simply a part of Raja Yoga. So you practice the correct posture, and then you go to breath control, and after you achieve breath control, number 5 is detachment from the senses. In other words, you start learning how to block out all other sounds and thoughts and sights. You get it all out of the way. That's the detachment of the senses. And then you arrive at number 6, concentration, because once you are able to ignore and completely come out of the world, so to speak, you can concentrate. Then you can go to step 7, which is meditation. And step 8 is absorption. Absorption where? Well, this is moksha, absorption into the Supreme Spirit. So that's Raja Yoga. That's one way to have a mystical experience. And there's two, Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti. Bhakti Yoga is simply the discipline of devotion to the sacred, devotion to the divine, however you experience the sacred. And it promotes devotion as a way to experience a loving union with the divine. Hear that? A loving union with the divine. Now, Bhakti Yoga also has stages, and I want you to hear these stages because they remind me of a religion that's very prevalent within our Western culture, but we might not think of it in this way. So, here are the stages of Bhakti: hearing the Lord, glorifying Him in song, remembering Him, attendance at His feet, worship, adoration, servanthood, friendship, and 9, the final one, is offering oneself to Him. And the idea is that when one arrives at total love, one sees the divine or the sacred in everyone and everything. Now, yes, this is a Hindu experience, and they have many gods in Hinduism, as you know, that they do in order and follow these particular steps in order to reach out to one particular God. But what does it sound like? Hearing the Lord, glorifying Him in song, remembering Him, attendance at His feet, worship, adoration, servanthood, friendship, offering oneself to Him, arriving at total love. To me, this is very similar. It's not exactly like by any means, but it's very similar to a Christian's journey when they want to arrive at total love for Jesus and all of Jesus' creation. I think it's amazing how often different religious traditions have some similar ideas and steps within them. It's something we can pay attention to. Like I said, I'm certainly not Hindu, and I don't think they're exactly the same. But if nothing else, it gives you a point of contact with somebody in the Hindu religion. At least it is a form of religion that you could probably understand a little bit if you are a Christian, and if you are a Hindu, it would help you understand Christianity a little bit. We can talk, even if we're not exactly the same. The next yoga is karma yoga. This is the discipline of action. Why is it called that? Because karma actually means action, right? Karma yoga has taken a lot of forms throughout history. In the very early period of India's history, it was primarily interpreted as the performance of ritual actions associated with animal sacrifice. The idea was that you would get the sacrifice exactly right, precisely right, and that would help you get much, much closer and eventually attain enlightenment or moksha. Today, it's usually thought of as a union between the divine will and the human will. And it's done, Mahatma Gandhi, one of the first actual Indian prime ministers of India, interpreted nonviolent resistance to British rule as a karma yoga. The Muslim idea of submission to the will of Allah would be considered a form of karma yoga to Hindu people. And the Christian's idea of submitting your life and your heart to God, that would be considered a form of karma yoga. Once again, it may not be exactly the same, but it's close enough where we can have a conversation about it anyhow. The next type of yoga is called Jnana Yoga, Jnana. This is the discipline of knowledge. And the idea is that you will overcome ignorance and false views that keep you bound to the world by studying everything in a very disciplined and, forgive the pun, it's not even a pun, it's just true, in a disciplined and religious manner. So you study all the religious text and commentary and scripture and philosophies, and the more you study, the more you learn that there's a oneness behind all of those many things that you've studied. They're really not all separate things, according to Jnana Yoga. They're all just one. And eventually, the student learns that monism, that is, all is one, is true. It becomes a personal experience of understanding, not just an intellectual understanding, but one that you take within yourself. It promotes a mystical identity with and knowledge of the oneness that lies at the foundation of reality. And thereby, you find moksha. Buddhist meditation, although it's not included in this list, is a little bit different, but it is a type of discipline. Meditation in general is a general label for a wide range of consciousness altering practices. It's also a way to enter into a trance state and achieve enlightenment. One way to look at meditation in general is to look at it as listening to the sacred power and to the universe as a whole. If you think of prayer as talking to God, then meditation is listening to God, which actually makes a lot of sense. In any conversation, there are going to be, one person talking and one person listening. And if you're always doing the talking, you certainly can't listen. So that's the idea behind it. Some people will ask about, well, what if you don't believe that religion is real? You don't believe in any type of sacred power. Why do all these people have these experiences? Or why do they believe they have these experiences? Well, it depends on who you ask. One of the more prevalent theories of this are psychoanalytic theories. That we find in psychology. Not that all psychologists believe in the psychoanalytic theories for religious experience, but they were started there. Sigmund Freud, who is sometimes called the father of modern psychology, based some of his ideas on the idea that the mental life functions on conscious and unconscious levels, and that childhood events, even on an unconscious level, have a powerful psychological influence in your life. And his theory was that religion in general, and religious experiences in particular, are kind of a projection of an unconscious wish or desire that never happened when you were a child. For instance, all children want a perfect parent. As we grow, most of our parents are pretty good, but we do find out that they're not perfect. And some children, bless their hearts, have absolutely awful parents. But even if we have an awful parent or a parent who just isn't perfect, we still have that need, that embedded desire for the perfect parent. So our unconscious kind of makes up a picture of this perfect parent, since we don't get one, and it puts a label on it. According to Sigmund, the label was God or sacred power, depending on what religion you were in. And he thought that this helped fulfill our unconscious wish and desire that had never been fulfilled. Now, his student, Carl Jung, by the way, that's Jung, but it's pronounced as if it were a Y, he thought the same thing to a certain degree, but he thought human unconsciousness was a collective unconsciousness of all the human race from the beginning of humans to the present day. And he believed that this collective unconscious contained material from every race and culture and historical age across history. Jung believed that the unconscious was filled with this creative energy that created these images or archetypes, if you will. The archetype is like a pattern card that shows you what something is. And he thought that these unconscious wishes and desires were fulfilled through these archetypes. So, in other words, if you were a child that didn't have a perfect parent, if you not even knowingly but unconsciously searched your collective unconscious of everybody in the world, you would find this pattern card, and it would have a picture on it of the perfect parent, God, if you will, or sacred power, however you want to see it, right? So basically, they're both saying that religious experiences aren't based on sacred power actually existing. They're based on people's wants and needs that are never fulfilled. And there we come to the end of chapter 7. I really want you to read this chapter closely. It's got some ideas in it that are hard to understand. A lot of you may never have been exposed to them. Read the chapter. Read it 2 or 3 times if you need to, because I have all kinds of ideas that you will understand this. You're smart people, and I have all kinds of faith in you. And until next time, I'm out. Have a fun day. Bye-bye.